This is Marketing Careers Uncovered, and I'm Dave Hayward. Even in the age of automation, AI, and everyone losing their minds over prompts, one thing hasn't changed. The art of writing still matters. Whether it's a landing page, a legal complaint, or even a line of copy on a little button, the words we choose can make a real difference to how customers experience a brand. And too often that gets overlooked or siloed into one specific team or area of the business. So I really wanted to talk to someone who spent a good amount of time putting writing right at the centre of how businesses communicate. Harry Ashbridge is with me today, and he's previously led writing and customer experience at Monzo Bank. He's built teams that don't just write, they influence culture, shape products, and really push for clarity at all times. So Harry, why don't you tell us a little bit more about you and what you're up to at the moment?
Thanks very much, Dave. When I heard that somebody was interested in me for the MCU, this wasn't quite what I had in mind, but I'm still delighted to be here. I left Monzo in August last year. I was the head of writing customer experience there. I was there for about 6.5 years. I'm sure we'll talk a bit more about them later. But in the meantime, I knew that I wanted to go into a next permanent role, but I took my sweet time to find what that was. And I've just been doing some contracting and clearing my head of all the Monzo experiences and getting ready to do the next thing.
Very good. Let's wind the clock back a little bit. And before we talk and really get under the skin of Monzo, what originally led you into writing and brand work? Did you always see yourself heading in this direction?
No, not at all. Although when I was very little, I did one of those, you answer a bunch of questions and it spits out what your career will be. And I did get copywriter, but I had no idea what that was. So I just ignored it. English was my best subject at school, but I didn't study it when I went to uni. I had this very pretentious idea that I didn't want my kind of reading diet dictated to me in some way. So I did philosophy and history, and then I got an MA in history. And when I graduated, I thought, I'm a master of history. The world must be my oyster. And apparently no one cares about that at all. And so I got a job proofreading in a company that trained financial services kind of recruits from banks. And I was editing all of their training material. I didn't enjoy it very much, but it kind of got me in the door as something adjacent to writing.
I can imagine it was pretty dry stuff.
It was really, really dry stuff. I knew quite a little bit about how to get your kind of CFA qualifications for a while, or what cumulative derivatives were, but only in kind of a parrot way where I didn't understand it. I just read it many times. And then I saw an ad one day for this company called The Writer, and they said that they existed to rid the world of the tyranny of linguistic mediocrity. And I had
Ooh,
no idea
ooh,
what
that's
that
quite.
meant, but it sounded incredible. And so I was like, oh, okay, I want to go and see what they do. And so I applied for a job there and got a role as junior editor. And then I kind of worked my way up there into becoming a writer and running writing training. And then eventually, after about 6 years of being there, I was running my own department around writing in relation to the customer experience. And The Writer, they probably still say this now, we always used to say we're the world's largest language consultancy. And because nobody can quantify really what largest means, they can probably still get away with saying that now.
You've skipped through a few things quite quickly there, particularly that development journey from junior copywriter to starting to cut your teeth and develop some of the skills. What did you pick up along the way that started to shape your thinking and approach to writing and brand building?
Yeah, it was an incredible place to get your kind of writing apprenticeship. It's an incredibly smart bunch of writers and thinkers, all the kind of basic principles around what makes writing work, and also kind of how to make it come to life in a business that I still believe in now. I definitely learned them all there. Um, you got exposure to a lot of different clients and a lot of different industries. I ended up sort of gravitating or being lucky enough to end up with the ones in really regulated complex spaces. So I had, pretty much every big bank in the UK you can name was a client that I worked with. And then regulators themselves, like the FCA or Solicitors Regulation Authority or the General Medical Council. And what kind of drew me to those is writing is so fundamental to the experience that customers have of them through the letters or the emails or the policies or the contracts. And their systems are really big and complex and archaic and interconnected. And so the problems that they have in terms of communicating with customers are really intricate and complex to solve. And the impact you can have for people is huge, because usually those companies are telling you something that's really serious and relates back to some important experience that you have in your life, whether that's legal or financial or whatever that might be. And what being there really taught me fundamentally, which informs my philosophy probably more than anything else, is that like there are universal things that make writing effective. And if you have a basic set of principles in mind, you can kind of apply them to any bit of writing, and you will be heading in the right direction. And that is what I kind of brought to how I think about structuring my team at Monzo, and how I'll always think about any kind of writing job in the future. The other thing it's probably worth mentioning that really made a difference to how I think about roles since then is that I did for a while there a hybrid account management and writing role. So I was looking after the client relationships with some of the clients I had, as well as being the person who did the writing and the training. And that was really, really useful as a kind of grounding for before I went in house, because I had to learn how to frame this work and sell it to different audiences, and how to kind of unpick a brief and make sure that our cost benefit ratio was in the right kind of space, and so that we weren't just selling stuff that then it was costing us the same amount to provide. And I think where I was seeing all the parts of the equation there of what the business needed, what the creative kind of ask was, and then what we needed from our end as a business, that really led to probably the most impactful work, because I had access to all the different parts of the equation. And when I went to Monzo, actually, I just kind of did all the things that I'd been selling at the writer for the best part of 6.5 years. Um, and funnily enough, if you do it all properly, it seems to work, which is kind of vindication after all those years of trying.
That's a really helpful and interesting picture. Some of my own experiences as well of working with a bunch of really, really smart people who understand their craft is that you also you also build up quite a lot of resilience as well, because you tend to have your work challenged far, far more intensely when you're working with people who this is really their bread and butter. And that counts a lot. And I would imagine that did that spill into your account management part of the role and approach as well, where you're able to respond to some quite intense criticism sometimes when people don't quite understand why you've tackled something in a particular way, or you haven't done it in a way in which they might have approached that.
Yeah, I mean, the core tenet I think of good writing is just have empathy and understanding, and get into the context of the person or people at the other end of whatever you're saying. And that is true whether you are having, somebody have a look at your proposal for the work and the costing that goes alongside it, or whether it's the end product of a bit of writing that's going to go to customers. You have to understand the audience and what they need and what problems they're trying to solve, and what they understand and what they really care about, rather than what you'd want them to care about. And then also, are they going to read this leisurely over the course of a cup of tea, or are they going to be reading this between meetings on their phone and they don't really care? All of that stuff is the stuff that makes for thinking about the reader and then producing effective writing at the other end. So it was useful to see it applied across all those different areas as well, for sure.
Let's talk Monzo. So I've got a really good understanding now of that philosophy that you developed. So when you joined Monzo, you took quite a different and perhaps unique approach to structuring the writing team. Can you talk me a little bit through that and how that started to pan out?
Yeah, sure. So in most companies that are fortunate enough to have sort of brand marketing, copywriting, and what you might call content design, or you might call UX writing, they're usually separate functions. The brand marketing, copywriting people report into brand marketing, and then the UX writers or content designers, I'm just going to say content designers for simplicity, um, they will usually report into design or product and design, if that's in one area. And sometimes those writers will work closely together, and sometimes they will kind of collaborate, but usually there's a bit of a separation between them. They might have different guidelines. Their work will certainly be reviewed in different forums by different people who have different ideas of what good looks like and what their priorities are. And that is an artificial split, I think. Writing is writing. To do it well, you consider audience, the medium you're communicating in, the purpose of the thing you're producing, and then you use the tools that a writer has to fit that purpose. And some people are definitely more naturally inclined to do kind of structured systems thinking and to unpick processes, and they end up more in the content design side. And some people are definitely more drawn to abstract ideas and punchy lines and kind of summing up ideas in a pithy way, and they go and work in brand marketing writing. Um, but the idea that they are two separate disciplines to me is just total nonsense. Like, writing is writing. Separating them out has definitely helped more writers get jobs, because content design has kind of borrowed the language of product design, and that's helped more writers get a seat at that design table, which is great news, and I'm very glad of it. But that separating them entirely as if they're two different functions just contributes to a big problem that basically every business writing function has, which is a lack of consistency. Different parts of the business communicate differently with their customers, and it feels kind of like a broken experience from the end customer's point of view. And it only really makes sense to have those functions separately from an org chart standpoint. It doesn't make sense to have them separate from an end customer experience or brand standpoint. So when I built my team at Monzo, I was head of writing deliberately. Well, I came in as a writer deliberately and then became head of writing deliberately, because I didn't want to have some separation between copywriting, marketing copywriting, and then content design. Like, my team looked after all of it. And we looked after, compliance communications. We looked after operational comms, customer service. We looked after legal writing, because I really wanted to make sure that there wasn't any kind of a break in that experience from a customer's point of view.
Did you meet much resistance from other colleagues in that? Because from some points of view, that might be considered a bit of an overreach, starting to get
Didn't
involved in compliance and legal and and everything else.
Yeah, I thankfully no. Partly because when I joined, it was so small. It was like about 180 people or something. Monzo, when I joined, I was the first writer. No one had actually hired this role. I'd kind of pitched my job to them and said I could do this for you. And so when I arrived, I had a very blank slate. Also, everybody there was so friendly and curious and open-minded and kind of intellectually humble about what they did and how they might be better at it, that if you could present something that seemed like it was a good idea and you could explain why you thought it was a good idea, you kind of got the permission to try it and see if it worked. So I was pushing on an open door, and I'm very, very fortunate. Also, the culture of that business is so customer centric in a way that I think a lot of companies talk about but don't really live. But basically, if I could say, if we do it this way, I'll be able to demonstrate it'll be better for customers. Well, that was an argument winning line every time. Like, nobody ever gave any pushback on that. And so I could build my team from scratch. I think if I'd gone into a company that already had copywriters in one area and kind of content designers in another, probably would have been more difficult. But everybody was just happy to have some help, because that was the vibe of the business, and still is.
So this is another notch on the importance of culture, really, in helping drive the right behaviours for the right reasons. So traditionally, when we talk about writing and guidelines, these tend to live in a set of brand guidelines or editorial style guidelines, which we brush off once in a blue moon. They sit on a shared drive somewhere. I may or may not look at them when producing content, but you took a little bit of a different approach, didn't you? Didn't you? Yeah, we've already alluded to that in terms of starting to build writing into the culture and fabric of the business. How did you go about that? I guess the two angles I'd really like us to look at here is both the practical nuts and bolts, and also how you get, let's call them non-writers, to really care about this stuff as much as you do.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it's really the core of what makes this stuff effective. Like, the way a company communicates with its customers is a reflection of its culture and its values. If you say you're a customer centric company, but then the T's and C's that people have to agree to use your service are incomprehensible, well, then you are not customer centric. It's objectively the case, because if you were, you would make it so that your customers can understand all the things that they need to understand to be a contented and satisfied customer of whatever you offer. So in that sense, Monzo was the perfect place, because the reason I went there, I was drawn to it in the first place, was they already cared about all those things. Like, everything, they were already working hard to make things clear and straightforward, including things like T's and C's. What I offered to them as the reason to hire me was that I could put a framework around that and scale it as they grew, which we did. We grew incredibly fast. So to do that, you do need guidelines. You have to set down, here is what we want to do in writing, and agree to it and have everybody agree to it, so you have a path forward and something to refer back to. But that's kind of step 1.1 on actually having an approach to writing that lives in a realistic way in the business and customers kind of experience. Usually people write those guidelines, like you say, put them in the drawer, have them on the SharePoint or wherever it might be, and no one ever looks at them. So what I actually did, the first thing when I arrived at Monzo, was I just went around all the different teams and said, what problems have you got? And then tried to figure out ways that writing could help solve those problems. Because you said, talk to the non-writers. My counterpoint would be that there are no non-writers in a tech business and a digital business. Like if you use a laptop every day, your main thing that you produce is writing. Like whatever your job title says, the thing you spend more time doing than anything else is writing words. And that goes if you're an engineer. It doesn't matter that you're still writing commit messages for GitHub, you're still writing proposals, you're still writing on Slack or Teams or whatever you use. Like words are the thing that a company that provides digital services, like Monzo is a digital bank, words are the thing they produce more than anything else. They are the product. Because of that, if you go to people and say, this thing that you do all day, every day, it's a core skill. And if you improve that skill, you'll be better and more successful at your job. That's much more effective than going in and starting to talk to people about an abstract idea of brand or brand voice or kind of connecting with an audience. It was much more tangible for them. And once you kind of got that hook in, that's where training comes in. So giving people the confidence and the skill to be better writers by showing them what is universally effective and how they can apply it in their own jobs, whether they're writing to customers or not. And so I made it mandatory so that everyone at Monzo gets writing training as part of their onboarding. And that works really well for a few reasons. One is that because it's in onboarding, there's an implicit sense that, oh, this is really important because I get my anti-money laundering training and I get my kind of cultural orientation and I get my writing training at the same level of importance. But also it meant that when I did need to go and work with a team on some customer facing stuff, they were already brought into the approach. They already saw me or somebody in my team as the authority on the subject. And you ended up not having what can happen sometimes, which is kind of an antagonistic approach with legal and compliance or other teams who are often silos that you don't usually get to touch. And it makes everything work more smoothly. So that cultural building a culture where people care about language element is really driven mostly by the training, because you have to expose everybody to the idea that this is important and get them bought in. And once you've done that, it becomes self-perpetuating, I think. And then
Yeah, I really like that.
practically,
I really like that mindset actually of putting it really up there with some of the really serious compliance obligations, and that really just clear statement of intent from a get go. This is important, and you need to get this.
yeah, completely. I mean, also internally in a business, like the risk and compliance team, they're producing risk reports, they're writing policies, they're producing lists of risk controls. If their colleagues can't understand those things, then they won't work. They won't be effective. And so it is in their interest to care about writing. And once you've helped people understand, oh, every day I do these things that contribute to me being better at my job by writing this way, it's much easier to then sell them on the idea that we should use those same principles when we write to customers. It's just it's if you break it down, really what we're talking about is showing people their self-interest in this thing. It's really effective. It's more effective than talking about some idea of a brand that people in a business don't always really feel like they're contributing to. Like the engineers maybe don't really always feel like they're contributing to the brand. And the risk and compliance folks or the people team, HR, whatever, they might not really feel like they contribute to the brand in a company that treats its brand as mostly a kind of an outward facing thing, but actually writing is a reflection of that brand, and that exists everywhere all the time. And then practically speaking, since you asked about the culture and the practical, we have a Monzo's tone of voice set of guidelines of writing principles that exists, and we made it public because we believed in transparency, so there was no reason not to. But aside from people on LinkedIn, no one really reads those long sets of guidelines. So we made it a thing to put writing guidance at the point of use for people. So we have kind of writing design components in Figma that our product designers used. If you went into Google Slides templates or Google Docs templates, there'd be writing guidance there about how much information you could put on each screen and what kind of stuff you wanted to do. We had specific quick guides in areas like borrowing or complaints where they had niche things they needed to talk about. So with complaints, obviously, you have to be able to apologize effectively, but also how do you give people bad news when you're not in the wrong and that's a difficult balance to strike. So we gave them specific guidance. And if we tried to cram all of that into one overall set of guidelines, it would have been totally unusable. So we kind of federated the information out into the parts of the business where people actually needed to use it. And then it was at their fingertips and they were much more likely to think it was relevant for them and also use it because it was less of a barrier they had to jump over to take advantage of.
When you hear that, it sounds so straightforward and simple. Put the guidance where people actually need to see and use the guidance. I don't think I've ever worked in an organization that has ever done that, but it's frightfully simple, isn't it? And
I think so. And I think probably the reason it doesn't happen is because of that separation of copywriting over here, content design over there. Writers in the brand marketing world are often treated like an internal agency, sometimes explicitly kind of referred to as an internal agency, and sometimes just fed briefs that they have to respond to. And so they're always just reactive. But the way I built the team was that we had writers in the parts of the business that they were working with. So you had a writer in borrowing, you had a writer in business banking, you had somebody working over here on operations. And so their job in that area was to do great writing, but also to make it so that great writing was something that would happen, you know, with or without their involvement as much as we could. And that meant doing training and coaching and producing that guidance that was relevant for those teams. And in reality, 80% of the quick guide for borrowing was the same as 80% of the quick guide for complaints, because a lot of the principles of what they were doing were similar, but having it locally there for those teams in a way that they felt ownership of and involvement with meant they were more likely to use it. And so rather than the one set of guidelines no one looked at, we had 7 that got a lot of use. And that might seem like, oh, we've done too much, we've produced too much content, but each bit of content actually had a better chance of success because it was intended for the specific audience with them in mind and their context in mind, which again is, that's the heart of good writing, thinking about the audience and what they need.
yeah, but it's so easily forgotten. So loads of businesses that I come across and see, and you kind of feel this as well when you even navigate through as a customer. Many businesses tend to treat brand and customer experience as quite distinctly separate things. Why do you think that is, and why do you see them as the same?
Yeah, I've been part of brand teams and I've certainly worked on lots of brands. I don't think of myself as a brand person. I don't think of myself as a marketer either. I know what the title of this podcast is, but I've never really thought of myself as a marketer. My title at Monzo before and the next title for the role I'm going to is head of writing and customer experience. To me, brand and customer experience are the same thing, just looked at through kind of different ends of an org chart. What it's actually like to be a customer of the company, dealing with all the things that you deal with, the onboarding journey, using the product itself, if you have to contact customer service, if you go into debt, if you have to sign a contract, whatever it might be. Like if you're a tech company that offers any kind of a digital service, that experience is mostly words, right? On a laptop screen or a phone screen. And so I don't really see any actual distinction between brand and customer experience in that sense. Like the brand team will say that the brand is, the things that you make people feel or what they say about you when you're not in the room or the summary of all the experiences. And then customer experience will say, yeah, it's the summary of all the experiences. So I don't really see why they're separate. If I throw a very small amount of shade to my friends in brand, most brand teams I see spend more time on broadcast messages to potential customers and talking at a high level about the ideas behind the brand than on actually trying to improve the experience of being a customer of that brand and actually get into the detail and improve what it's like to use the service. And that time, if they spent it looking inward, would probably be more valuable because people don't really believe that brand marketing, your best foot forward in brand marketing is the real you anyway, right? They see brand marketing as a veneer, a nice thing that you do when you're trying to sell me something, but then the T's and C's are always hard to read, or the debt collections get very aggressive and officious and whatever else. And because of that disconnect, the pounds or dollars or euros or whatever it is spent on brand marketing are less valuable because we don't really believe them to be true anyway. And it's because of that, I think, a big part of that is because of that idea that brand is spending too much time focused on big ideas at a high level and not focused enough on actually improving the customer experience. And then customer experience teams, conversely, tend to be obsessed with measurement and quite often trying to find some single magic metric which captures the experience. But again, if they just spent some time going, hang on, but we've got these 200 letters here. Do we need them all? Are they all up to date? Why are there 200? What do they all say? Is it clear? Do they join up with what we're saying in the onboarding experience? Actually looking at the experience, which is mostly delivered through words, would probably have a bigger impact and would improve the experience in lots of different ways, measurable ways, even if there might not necessarily be one magical catch-all metric that you can point to. People talk about NPS or customer effort score. I think those are too abstract. I think you can get a lot further with improving the customer experience by looking at actual single points of experience in the journey and improving the way you communicate at those points. And that has a cumulative effect that's much greater than just spending time trying to get a graph that plots everything in one go.
Yeah, I think fundamentally though that's not really very sexy, is it? And yeah, human nature is to be drawn towards the big ticket stuff that you can wave in front of your mum or partner and go, "Look, look, that's me." Not, "Oh, do you know what? I redrafted those T's and C's the other day, and now they're 20% more legible." I mean, yes, it's probably got a much greater impact, but I can understand why people tend to avoid that.
That's true. That's completely true. And I don't really think of myself as a creative. Like I have done creative kinds of writing, and I'm responsible for, the writing style of the brand that a lot of people think of as creative, certainly in its industry. But the thing for me that set Monzo writing apart was that we were consistent with our approach. Like you could go to pretty much any point in the customer journey and talk to anybody and, look at any bit of writing and it would kind of still feel like us. And that is the thing that proves that when you say you're customer centric, you actually mean it. You say you care about democratizing finance. Okay, well then can I understand your T's and C's? Yes, I can. Well then that's true. Whereas if you spend your time making 20% of what you say really sexy, that's not your tone of voice. The other 80% is your tone of voice. And that's the bit the customers experience. And if you actually care about being customer centric, then it doesn't matter if it's sexy or not. That's the work to make it better. Um, and that's, like you say, not quite so enjoyable. And it's more, I think, difficult because you have to really be customer centric to make it happen. You can't change how a company does its kind of compliance around customer communications if actually the company doesn't really care about the quality of the experience for customers. So again, it comes back to culture. And if the culture of the business is not actually open and customer centric, it will be very hard to make all of the writing straightforward and simple and clear because you have to change a lot of internal processes and ways of thinking and measures of success. And that's why Monzo was such a great place to work because all of those things were aligned with the right thing. And it was just about executing on it rather than trying to change too many minds.
Well, you might not call yourself a marketer, but you're certainly talking and thinking in the right manner. So let's talk about now as Monzo started to scale and really ramp up in terms of size of teams, volume of customers. So yeah, you entered at a point in time where it was a small team. You had open doors to do things. How did your role evolve as Monzo scaled? Did the writing teams and your team's influence grow along with the company? Or did some of that siloed thinking start to creep in as the business scaled? And did you have to fight a little bit to maintain that impact and quite broad reach that you had?
Yeah, it's a great question. So we did grow ridiculously fast. It was about 180 when I joined. In my first year there, we hired 1,000 people. When I left last year, it was somewhere around 4,500 people. And at that speed, everything's a bit broken all the time, I would say. That's the reality with startups and scale ups. My role over time, for the first year, it was just me, and then I started to gradually grow a team. So I went from being right in the detail across, kind of everything. There was a point somewhere during my first year, around sort of August in my first year, and I remember thinking, No one write anything. No one release a product. No one do anything because everything's good right now. I'd kind of got my arms around all of it. And obviously that lasted about a second. And I'm sure there was stuff I was missing anyway. And so as the team grew and the business grew, my job became more about looking after the team. First of all, making sure that they were working on the right stuff and able to show their impact. And then trying to join the dots at a higher level, working with, the leaders in product and design and marketing and making sure that writing was plugged into the right areas at the right level of involvement and that we were kind of contributing to the overall success. Um, and I would say that probably being totally honest, the thing I'm most proud of is that culture of care for language is part of Monzo's DNA now, and it's not going anywhere. Like it will long outlive me and probably all the folks in my team as well, because one, it was kind of already there in a germ form when I arrived, and it just needed some some codification. And two, I do, take some credit, and my team should definitely take loads of credit for really perpetuating it and making it a big part of what Monzo stands for. Like Monzo's thing is communicating really clearly. Um, so writing is really highly prized, but I don't think that as we grew, the writing team always got the props they deserved. And I think this is the downside of the structure that I put in place. I still think it's the right structure, but the downside, one of them is definitely that because what writers were doing in their area was spread across design, marketing, product, engineering, compliance, customer service, they had a huge impact, but it was diffused. And so sometimes it was hard to put your hands around this is the thing that the writer did, because actually they were kind of involved in a bit of everything. And everything was a bit better as a result of their involvement, but you couldn't go this project or this release or that product was kind of entirely theirs. And for that reason, as time went on, it was a bit harder to point to the specifics that writing was contributing to, even though everybody knew it was important and valued the writers being there. That as we grew and the silos naturally crept in, because when you get to a certain size, it's just impossible to avoid. I do feel like writing was more and more valued, but the writing team didn't quite get all the flowers they deserved for the great work that they did.
So, what did it mean for you as a manager and leader then, having to look after and develop a team and make sure they feel valued?
Yeah, I think if I in the time I've had since I've left, one of my reflections is that I wish I'd sort of seen that drift a bit sooner and done more to maybe split the structure of the team a bit sooner and have a bit more specialism, but still under this one team umbrella. Or there could have been other things that I did. Um, like championing their work was the main thing. Making sure that when teams were talking about a successful release, or whichever representative or whichever team was talking about the work that we've done, that writers got their credit when the time came. Making sure that we were always focused on measuring the impact of what we did. That was a big thing. Like every bit of writing has a purpose, and we're a very data-driven company, so you could usually measure that purpose. That definitely helped, because then you could say a writer here contributed this many millions of pounds of revenue, and we could literally say that in some cases of purely a writer's involvement did it. And sometimes it was a writer contributed to this work, and we know that this work moved this metric in this direction that we wanted to go. And also trying to keep a sense of writing as being a unified function, even though the writers spent a lot of their time federated out in other parts of the business. So day to day, they were working, the writer in borrowing was working with the borrowing team mostly, but we made sure that as a team, we had sort of 20 to 30% of our time together, and that you could come together as a writing function and share work and vent and, talk about other stuff in the industry that you're interested in, and feel still like a single unit.
Yeah, I suppose it could be quite an isolated experience if you're over in a dark corner of a business and you've got colleagues, but you don't really spend time with them.
Yeah, so it was less. I mean, all the corners of the business were equally bright, I would say. But writers who were out in other parts of the business sometimes did feel a little bit caught between two stools, because their home was with the writing team in marketing, but also their home day to day was in borrowing. And I think that's kind of a function of any team that has cross functional people in it. And I don't think we suffered from it particularly. But obviously, if you have a central copywriting team in marketing who all work together all day, every day, that's a problem you don't have. Like you don't have that issue of feeling like you're sort of serving two different functions and straddling between the two and trying to meet the needs of two different areas.
If you're advising a startup today on building that writing culture that we've talked about from scratch, what would be your recommendations there?
Don't just focus on the sales funnel or the onboarding experience or the kind of the shiny bits that are going to grow the business. Like if you're new and small and you don't have a bunch of legacy systems that don't talk to each other very well, which is what happens when you get bigger, you have a real opportunity to get consistently good writing everywhere. And that basically doesn't exist. Like no companies really achieve that at scale. But the smaller you are, the easier it is to set the bar high and try and keep it high by setting the right processes from the start. I would say make sure everybody understands what good looks like and their role in it in terms of writing. So that's not just the creators of customer facing stuff, but everyone. So the compliance folks, the engineers, everybody that I've mentioned earlier. And you'll see the benefit of that internally as well, because most of the writing that a company produces is for itself. You will move faster and make better decisions if Slack messages are good, proposals are clear, slide decks are clear, your policies and your risk controls aren't incomprehensible to anyone outside of compliance. Like all that stuff just greases the wheels of making the business move quickly. And then lastly, I think consistency matters more than distinctiveness. This also applies to bigger companies, but I think it's definitely true if you're small. Like focusing too much too soon on like a linguistic point of differentiation in terms of a tone of voice, I think is a waste of time if you're only using it 20% of the time anyway. Like I said, your tone of voice isn't what's in the marketing, it's what's in customer service, your operational comms, debt collections, contracts, T's and C's. And there is a lot more of that stuff than the marketing normally. And so standing out is important. It's a good thing to aim for sure. But getting to a good standard of writing across the board first will have a bigger impact and a bigger measurable impact than tweaking some idea of brand voice that you're only ever going to deploy in a few places anyway.
Yeah, very good. And we've talked about the fact that you've recently left Monzo and are moving into a new and exciting space. Can you tell us a little bit about what you'll be doing and what excites you the most about the next step that you're taking?
Yeah, sure. I'm going to be announcing where it is soon, so I'm not going to drop the name now, but it's in clean energy. It's a tech company in clean energy. And basically, I'm going to be doing the same thing again. So, head of writing and customer experience, trying to build a culture of care for writing, trying to make sure all the writing is good all the time, trying to make sure the customer experience is a priority, and then proving that when you focus on those things, the business is better off as a result. Um, I've made no secret. Everything I've said to you is things that I've said to the founders and the people I'm going to work with. So they know what to expect, I hope, and they're really excited for it. Also, I'm pleased to be working in a space where I feel like it's unambiguously good. That every pound we make is going to be a pound that's put towards clean energy and kind of reducing our reliance on fossil fuels. So that is a great thing. And I'm also excited because this company owns the end-to-end experience. There's energy regulation. There's also financial regulation. There's billing and contracts, tons of operational complexity. And that to me is a load of opportunity to really help people. People are trying to go green. They're trying to do a good thing. And we have to handle quite complex financial and regulatory frameworks to help them do that. And so trying to make that really simple is, I think, a noble cause. I'm glad to get into that too.
And now you're going to have the benefit of having gone through a lot of what you're about to do your new firm, lots of really hard won experience that you can now layer over the top.
Yeah, completely. Like the benefit of all the mistakes that I made at Monzo, and hopefully some lessons that I've learned for sure. I'm looking forward to trying to do things sort of philosophically the same, but practically a little bit differently.
Brilliant. And finally, what's the one piece of advice that you'd give to writers or marketers, even though you try and tell me you're not one, who want to have a bigger impact within their organizations?
Yeah, I'm going to focus it in on writers because I feel more qualified. But I think some of it maybe still does apply. Marketers can tell me. I think where writers go wrong sometimes a little bit is in defending writing or the kind of abstract idea of brand voice or tone of voice on its own terms, like it's a good in and of itself. It's how you connect with an audience. It's how you make them feel something. And I think if you're outside, I agree with that, by the way, because I understand it. But I think people outside the writing world hear that and think, oh, so writing's a kind of a wishy-washy thing that doesn't really achieve anything tangible. And I don't think that could be further from the truth. Like if your product lives on a phone or a laptop, then your product is writing. Your writing is your customer experience. That's why I got my job title the way I did, and I completely agree with that. I think writing is the most important element of that experience. Like design, my design friends can come at me if they want, but if you take the words away, it would do a lot more damage than taking away the shapes and the colors. Like the writing is the most fundamental element of what we're producing if it lives on screen. And so the best writers for me and the most effective ones are the ones who can explain why they're doing what they're doing, help other people see the value of good writing, and show them who might not think of themselves as writers or people who contribute to writing how fundamental writing is to the success of a product or a campaign or a process that involves communicating with customers. There is tons of research and evidence-backed science to support why writing is so important, what makes writing effective, why serious topics don't need to be communicated really formally. Like it's all out there. There are tons of examples of the bottom line financial impact of better writing as well. And I think the writers who get familiar with that body of evidence and get good at winning over skeptics are the ones who are going to go far. Like, why should other people in a business understand the value of your role if you can't communicate it to them? And I think if you're a writer, the burden is definitely on you more than almost anyone else to be good at communicating the value of what you do. And so the folks who are good at the craft but can't unpack their work and win people over, I think are the ones who are going to struggle to get taken seriously and get a kind of a bigger seat at the table.
Well, I think that is an absolute perfect note for us to finish up on. Thanks so much, Harry. That's been absolutely fascinating, just getting under the skin of your craft a little bit there, and just some of the tangible things you've done, how you think and approach things as well will be really helpful to writers and marketers. Two sides of the same coin, perhaps, but that might be a debate for another day.
All marketers are writers as well. Everyone's a writer. That's what I
believe. Everyone's a writer. There we
Everyone's
go.
a writer.
Thanks so much for joining us today, and thanks to you for listening. If you've enjoyed today's conversation, don't forget to subscribe for future updates, leave a review, or share with your friends and colleagues. And with that in mind, we'll see you next time.